To be a radiologist, you have to literally be an expert in every single body part there is and every single modality to examine that body part.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Radiology Report podcast, where we are having conversations with the leaders transforming radiology today. You can find us on radiologyreportpodcast.com, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm your host, Daniel Arnold. Today, I'm so excited to have Daniel Corbett on the podcast. I'll get into his bio in a second, but Dan recruited his first radiologist in 1987 and talks to radiologists all day, every day. So I could think of no one better to talk radiology with than Dan Corbett, who's had a front row seat into the industry for many, many years. Dan Corbett is the founder and chief of business development of Radiology Business Solutions. He has 32 years of experience in the field of physician staffing and consulting. He has written and spoken to a diverse group of audiences about radiology business issues, recruiting, retention, practice compensation, practice models, and other areas of the business of radiology that are of big interest to the listeners of this show. Dan is also a contributing writer for Aunt Minnie, Radiology Today, and Radiology Business. You might have seen some of his work coming through your inboxes. He's widely recognized as an industry leader in the radiology job market and is responsible for all the marketing and business development for Radiology Business Solutions. Dan, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Daniel.
So start us off. How did you get into this field? What drew you into radiology? How'd you end up here? And tell us about some of the early days of your career.
Wow, that's we're really going back right now, a long way. So, like I said, I started off, wanting to go to college, and then realized I signed up for University of Michigan. Actually, the Dearborn campus is by where I grew up, and after the first 3 months, I said, no, this is not for me. I didn't know what I was going to do. But my mother was the chief emergency nurse at an old hospital called Wayne County General Hospital, which is a U of M affiliate in the far western suburbs of Detroit. It's torn down now, but most people would recognize it is because it's on the same campus as Eloise, which is the old mental institution, which is supposed to be haunted and that. But anyway, so she said, "Hey, why don't you come over and join the X-ray tech program that they have there," which was the So I said, "Why not?" So I did the 2-year X-ray tech program, and I actually loved it. The clinical, the technical part of it, and all that. And graduated. When I graduated in 1982. Of course, there were hardly any X-ray jobs at all. So I ended up working at Oakwood Hospital in Dearborn as a therapy tech. So as simulator tech, doing all the the simulator setups for the therapy, and I ended up moving into therapy, and I did that until 1986 when I got tired of all my patients dying. Oncology is, you got to have a golden heart to work in oncology. So,
yeah.
So my father owned a company. He actually, had purchased it, or off of originally Miss Davis and Christine Davis and Pearl Davis and Christine Smith. They were like one of the first staffing companies in the country. These were two nurses from Canada who moved to Detroit during the war. And they started after the war. They were occupational health nurses working at the factories. Actually, they worked at Willow Run they made the Liberators during the war. So these two ladies, when the war ended, they decided to open up a staffing business to help their fellow nurses find work. So Davis Smith was founded in 1946, and Mrs. Smith and Mrs. Davis ran that company and grew it, and hired my father actually the year I was born, in 1962, which is really interesting. So my father had been in the business a long time, and then he eventually bought it off of them. And interestingly enough, my father was the first person in the country to place a physician for a fee. He got a call from Henry Ford Hospital at the time and said, "Hey, listen, we need an anesthesiologist. Can you find one?" And my dad said, "Hey, listen, I don't know a lot of people." He ended up getting that doctor signed, and the fee was $200, which is a far cry from where it is today. So yeah, so he has, my father was eventually started and was a president of the National Association of Physician Recruiters. So he eventually, he networked with every physician recruiter in the country, and we did find out that he eclipsed most physician recruitment by at least a decade. It was
Hmm.
it was crazy. So anyway, he asked me if I was interested in his business, and so in 1987, late 86, early 87, I joined his company and learned the physician recruitment business. And like I said, I placed my first doctor in 1987, and I was hoping that I would be able to use my radiology expertise, to recruit radiologists. But at the time, radiologists didn't need any recruiting services or anything like that. And so I did cardiology and neurosurgery and all the high end specialists. And then I kind of really got into the practice part, the dynamics of how to get a physician to sign with a practice. I mean, most recruiters even today don't really get into the guts of it. So
So in the 80s, this is pre-internet. How are you finding these doctors and placing them? Are you looking
I
through
there
the
there
white
was a
pages?
Yeah, I mean, there was a company that's still around today called Medical Marketing Lists, and they're the primary list company for the AMA, and you could go buy
Mhm.
lists. But unfortunately, then there weren't a lot of phone numbers and things like that. So you literally had to grab a name, look them up, get the phone number, and so it was a lot of cold calling. It was
Mhm.
it was a whole different world than it is now. When I started with my dad's company, I mean, they had documents that were still on onion skin, if you remember what that is.
Oh.
Before paper. So it was really interesting. So, but I did that, specialty stuff all the way through until probably 1996 or 7 is when the first rumblings of the first radiologist shortage came up. And we started a locums company at the time. My wife ran the locums company, developed it from scratch. And so locums gets the call. When any shortage manifests, you start to see the increase in the call for locums. So she noticed that all of a sudden we're getting radiology stuff. So it just went crazy from there. So in 1999, I signed 33 individual radiologists to private practices. It was like just absolutely crazy, crazy time.
What
So,
was going on in the world in 1999? Why
and
was there
in
such a big shortage?
1999, that's when the first shortage really manifested itself. And it
Yeah.
was a combination of a lot of like similar today, a lot of the old senior radiologists were all retiring, and I think that the residency programs were kind of at a low. Radiology was just at that time heavily moving into the DICOM era,
Mhm.
where everything was digital. And that's how we got through that. I make this point quite often, is that I think the shortage was as deep as it was back then as it is now. But back then, we were moving out of film into digital, and radiologists' productivity increased significantly due to that. And so, whereas we had most groups were short like they are today, the volumes were going up, but they figured out how to increase those volumes per radiologist by using efficiency. PACS was really maturing at the time. So everything was going digital, and that's what got us through. But the shortage came on significantly and rather quickly, to where it literally destroyed quite a few private practices, where
Mm.
radiologists they just couldn't recruit, they couldn't keep up, and the practices just had nothing else other to do than just give the hospital notice that we're going to fall apart, we can't recruit. A lot of them got subsidies from the hospital, to get, financially, more competitive out there. But the bottom line is, you and I both know that in any particular market, the amount of money that a radiology group or a radiologist earns is directly related to the volume that they read and the reimbursement that they get. So it's not
Mhm.
like the pie can get bigger or smaller at any given time, unless somebody puts money into the pie. And so a lot of hospitals subsidized the groups back then to keep them afloat. So that's kind of where RBS started. I was heavily into recruiting, basically nothing but radiologists at the time. I dropped everything and went to radiology. So I was kind of the expert at the time for radiology recruitment. And I got a call from one of the in-house recruiters at a hospital in Kalamazoo, Michigan, who said, hey, listen, I, was very secret squirrel. You need to sign a non-disclosure agreement and come over here and meet with our C-suite. We have a major radiology problem. So I figured, hey, whatever, let's go. So I went over there and met with them, and they announced that their group, which was CalRad at the time, which was one of the oldest radiology practices in the country, still probably is, even though they're not CalRad anymore. They're completely different, but they had both of the big hospitals in Kalamazoo, Michigan, and they were struggling to recruit, and they just could not find enough people. So instead of, they basically took their weakest link and gave them notice that we're contracting. We're going back down to one hospital because we can't maintain the staffing for two. So the hospital basically got 90-day notice that they were going to lose all their radiology provider services. And they were just shocked and had no idea what to do. So,
Wow.
I asked them, what are you going to do? Well, we've had the big recruiting companies in here, Time, Jackson and Coker, Delta, all the big ones. And I said, well, so what did they suggest? They said, well, yeah, you just go ahead and, you guys employ them, and we'll, give us, 8 retainer. They needed 8 FTE radiologists, and give us 8 retainers and we'll recruit them for you. Right. And I just laughed. I said, that's not going to happen. You guys,
and it no longer costs $200, right?
Yeah, no, exactly. Not where they're like 30 grand a pop right there. So, but anyway, I just told them that would absolutely fail, and you guys are going to spend a lot of money and get nothing. And they, asked why. I said, because employing radiologists, remember this is 1999. I said,
yeah,
employing radiologists is not going to work. The specialty is too diverse. There are, too many different modalities. No radiologist is the same. They have to have skin on the, and they're also very smart business wise. They're not the same as internists or cardiologists or ED docs. They're a whole different breed of cat. So they said, what would you do? And I said, well, you need another private practice. I said, I think we should build you a new private practice from scratch, because even in a short market, it was still, partnership tracks were still long and starting to come down. And I said, if we, advertise that we're building a new practice and we offer immediate parity for any new radiologist, plank owner coming in, I said, I think we'll get candidates. And, I could, talk about the whole process, but the bottom line is within a period of 4 months, I had 8 radiologists signed up, and and that's where I met my current partners. Dr. Mark Weiss was an IR radiologist, and he was practicing with a big group in Saginaw, and he called me because he was interested in, he thought it was interesting concept, and I tried to recruit him, but my wife didn't want to move to, Sue didn't want to move to Kalamazoo, but he was fascinated, and he really helped me with a lot of the stuff that I struggled with, which is a lot of the internal dynamics and the, corporate setup and stuff. And Mark knew my partner, Robert Schaefer, who was an attorney with Klein Griffin here in Flint. And Robert was doing a lot of contract work with him. Actually, Robert was defending doctors, in malpractice suits and stuff. But Robert kind of helped us do all the early contracts. And Julie, our chief financial officer, she was working with Dr. Weiss, and she's, really into the operation stuff and did all of our early pro formas. So the team kind of came together informally in like late 2000, 2001. And we did this project, and I got paid. Dr. Weiss didn't make anything, but he just kind of followed along with the project, and it got done. And I thought, okay, that was an interesting project, boom, And so a couple months passed. Next thing I know, I get a call from St. John's Hospital in Detroit. We have a major radiology problem. We heard you're the guy to fix it,
Yeah,
So we got the band back together, and one after another. And so here it is now 2004, and we've already put like 3 groups together, informally under my original company, Davis Smith. And I remember Dr. Weiss and I, and my father, who was at the time getting ready to retire, sitting on the deck up by Crystal Lake, believe it or not, by where Mark had a second home, talking about it. And we said, there's a business here. Dr. Weiss said, I'm done working for you for free. So, because I was making all the money and he was just helping, So we penciled out RBS on a napkin at the restaurant and formed the company, and off we went. And I think it was not even within that first year we enticed Robert away from his practice, and Julie had moved on to one of our practices that we had put together in Massachusetts, and she tutored there under I think one of the most brilliant radiologists I've ever met, a guy by the name of Prakash Malkani, and his partner Deepak Singh. These were guys, former colleagues of Dr. Weiss's, and these guys were just absolutely amazing when it came to the operations of a private practice and finance, and they were really the seeds of the compensation models that we're using right now. So, but we ended up, Julie got back, and so that was the 4 partners in RBS, and off we were. So between that period of time, 2004 and 2009, we built like 4 or 5 more practices from scratch, 4 hospitals that had lost their groups.
Wow.
And that was kind of how we started. And then when that kind of dried up in 2009, which was after the last group that we built, when things stabilized really well, we just took everything we knew and we just went on the consulting trail. And we did, hundreds of consulting projects with radiology groups that either had a contract renewal with the hospital coming up, and they were at odds over either service requirements or finance. They either needed a subsidy and they couldn't needed to justify it, or they had a subsidy and the hospital wanted to pull back and they needed to justify it. So yeah, all of the contract negotiations, we did lots of those. And then we kind of evolved into what we called our overall operational efficiency type of project, where a radiology group would hire us and we come in with our team, which always included radiologists and the finance people and everything, and we would do a top-down complete analysis of the practice, finance, staffing, efficiency, contracts, internal governance, everything with the practice, and write these big reports on.
Yeah. When you do those analyses, I'm just curious, you come into a group for the first time, but you've been helping 100 groups.
Mhm.
What are the top 3 things you're finding that they're doing wrong? Or maybe wrong is harsh, but opportunities for improvement, to put it more positive spin.
There's always a common theme, and it always came down to internal dysfunction due to either money or workload. A lot of them centered around interventional radiology, where the IRs are separated philosophically and financially and a lot from the group. The diagnostic radiologists are kind of subsidizing the IR because that's kind of when the 2000s, when everything got down into productivity and efficiency and RVUs and how much you collect. And I mean, it's a fact that if you're re-diagnostics, you're going to collect a lot more money than you are doing IR procedures. But the fact is that IR is a critical part of a radiology practice, because they are the face of the group when it comes to the medical staff and the patients. That the IR guys are the ones that everybody recognizes because they're meeting these people. So they're kind of the lost leader of the group. They don't make as much money, but they contribute in so many other ways. Because if they have a patient that they embolize from a car accident, and that patient, his wife is she's the one who's going to want to keep going to that hospital to get her mammograms and all the other kind of stuff. So that's just kind of how it works, right? So we did a lot of these early projects on how to, bring IR and diagnostic radiology. And Dr. Weiss was just absolutely phenomenal at this. He was a radiologist, but he understood the business. He was also fantastic in liaising with the hospital medical staffs and more importantly, C-suite. I think he was the one radiologist that I'd ever met that could talk to an administrator. And for some reason, they just loved him. He was brutally blunt, and he, said what he needed to say. But for some reason, they just trusted him and listened to him. So he was able to facilitate a lot of these, deals and make these problems go away for these hospitals and these groups. So it was
okay. So IR versus DR and getting the model right and making everyone happy.
And
Both
then
personally, workload wise, financially is one common theme. What's another theme that you see?
usually, hours of service, coverage, and call. Those are always issues. A lot of them, when you get down to it, it comes down to the internal dynamic, and we still see it today, where the difference between all radiologists are not the same. You got somebody that is absolutely loses no sweat over reading 90 RVUs in a 9-hour shift. And then you've got one who's absolutely struggles to do 50, and is murdering themselves over it. And that's just the way human beings work. But most radiology practices were basically, equal share practices, where once you're a partner, they pay the bills and divide up all the money, and they divide it amongst themselves. So that dynamic between the one that's, reading twice the volume of the other one and getting paid the same amount of money has always been an issue with the group. And the bigger the group, the more that spread becomes, and the more internal discourse there is, and it literally can destroy groups. So we basically worked hard, and that's kind of where the compensation model evolved, and we implemented it with some of our early groups. And it's not right for all practices, but with the bigger groups, and when I say bigger, I say 15 plus, all the way up to 100. The model works great, because what we do is we make it not all about productivity, but you also have to be able to incentivize the less productive people, because private practice is more than just reading a film and billing an RVU.
Yep.
There's a lot more to it. So our model was based on a certain percentage of the radiologist income coming from production RVUs, and the rest coming from shifts that they work. Because Dr. Weiss always said, you only have two things to give. You've got your knowledge and you've got your time. And that's true for everything, not just radiology. Sure. So why should we have to build a model based on some really smart people, but their time is valuable too, but they're not going to be able to produce the revenue. I mean, so every one of these models is slightly different depending on the group and desires.
Where does the dial usually fall between productivity and sort of base?
Well, it's interesting because every group gets to choose that, and we have them that are they move like 70% is based on productivity and 30% is based on shifts. And we have others that are the opposite, that they want 60%, lifestyle groups are 60% based on shifts, and they de-emphasize the productivity. And others are just go 50-50. And the beauty of the model is that you can tweak it, as time goes on. Starting a comp model like that is very labor intensive process, because you have to have absolute buy-in from every one of the partners in the practice, because it can be destroyed by just a couple of people.
So when you're coming into groups then and giving them a new comp model, do they already usually have some sort of productivity model but it's not working, or are they like, sometimes it's a partnership and they just split everything, whatever, 20%, 20, a fifth, and you go in and there's all,
or the exact opposite. They're already on some kind of comp model, and it's destroying the group because everybody's cherry picking and it's being gamed.
So they're productivity based and everyone's working hard, and
there's no sheriff in town monitoring it, right? so there's a lot of reasons why it happens, and there are a bunch of different models out there, and they can work if they're implemented properly and they're managed properly. That's probably the problem, because most radiology groups, if they're a group of 10 or 15 or 20 or even 50, they rarely have an internal management mechanism to be the sheriff. Most groups these size, they've got really brilliant operations people that do all the stuff that we do in our practice. But they're really, though, very few of them are willing to go and say, hey, point out Dr. Jones, who's been, squeaking the system and manipulating everything, right? So you have to have strong governance, you have to have a strong leadership, and you have to have strong operations to make it work. But if you do it right and implement it, it can make all of these problems go away. Every group that we've worked with and implemented a compensation model and done the process correctly, meaning got the buy-in from all the radiologists, find out what motivates them, taken our radiologist consultants and sat them in every seat. Not working, but just talking to the radiologist in this particular seat, because you weight the shifts based on difficulty, complex, the ones nobody want to work. So, Dr. Weiss called them the murder shifts, where you sitting at this hospital, you're going to get interrupted every 2 minutes. The pack's going to go down 3 times a day. It's just one of those seats where you're getting murdered no matter what. That one needs a higher shift differential than the outpatient facility, brand new outpatient facility where nobody's bothering you. You can crank through, 90 RVUs in a day, right? Because in the murder seat, you'd be lucky to make 40, right?
Yep.
So everyone has a value. So in those particular seats where you can't be productive, you're going to get paid a higher shift value. So if the normal day shift is 1 or whatever it is, outpatient shift may be 0.9 and the hospital shift may be 1.2, weekends are 1.5.
So financial models, fair financial compensation models are a common theme. Are there other maybe a third most common theme that you find with these groups?
Yeah, hospital relationships. That's always the one. There's always, some kind of tension between the hospital, whether it's, it's financial or service. And man, we did so many of them with just bad blood, bad behavior, radiologists, doctors dealing with C-suites. I think it happens, pretty much along specialties, but for some reason, until there's a threat that they're going to go away, most hospital administrators don't really understand radiology, and they don't understand, most of the medical staff too, those radiologists, he pulls up in his Corvette and he goes into his little black hole and, he comes back out and then he takes 12 weeks vacation, what? But they don't realize how much they absolutely rely on the radiologist read and till the threat of it is going away, because the radiology is the pillar of the
Is
hospital.
it competitive out there right now for, your groups? Are they getting threatened by the hospitals that they'll go to another group?
No, not our groups. I think in a shortage scenario like we are, there's security that there's nobody out there that has the manpower to take over whole contracts. It's a force that's going to collide here once a lot of this stuff shakes out, because and that's what happened back in the late 90s, early 2000s during the first shortage, is there were a lot of groups, big groups that started, in the early 90s, taking over these hospitals and growing. And so what they would do is they would take a hospital an hour and a half away, and they would hire somebody, a radiologist, and put them out there as their anchor, and then that would be their site. So those radiologists kind of felt like the redheaded stepchild, where, I'm part of this group, but I'm really isolated out here. And, I do all the work, generate all the revenue, and I'm not getting paid what I should be, So there were a lot of abusive practices under that type of model. So, but when the shortage came, the next thing all the jobs started becoming available, they were the first person to leave. Right.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden, I don't need to be here and be all by myself and take this crap anymore. There's hundreds of jobs out there. So they would leave. And then the group would say, oh, well, we could try to find somebody to replace them, but they couldn't. So all of a sudden, all these contracts were available and these hospitals were left hanging because of that. So it's just kind of how the ebb and flow of business, supply and demand, that's the way the world works.
Shifting gears a bit. So one of the roles that you play in supporting your groups is recruiting. Tell us a little bit about how that's been going. Are you able to place jobs, and how are you cutting through the noise, and, talk to us a little bit about how recruiting's going.
Yeah, well, at my core, I am a recruiter, the recruiting always gets such a bad rap, especially the private, fee for service recruiters. I was one. And I think a lot of the recruiting companies do get a bad rap because, they hire people to source and they really don't understand, the details that somebody wants. They're working off a script. So good or bad, recruiters have always been around, but the best recruiters are the ones that completely immerse themselves in their clients, in the business, and can answer any question a candidate may have. But because I am the recruiting responsible person for RBS, and RBS is the accountable management back office for our private practice clients, I know there is to know about the group. I can answer all those questions because I'm on
So
the
you
management.
act as the in-house recruiter for the
Exactly.
dozen groups that RBS serves.
Correct. Correct. So I am the first contact with all the recruits for them. I do all the marketing, run all the ads, do all the emails, all the screening, everything, so that our client groups don't have to worry about it until I present a candidate to them. And then I present that candidate to them with as much information as they could ever need to because I build personal relationships with my candidates and answer all their questions and get to know them. And so,
what are candidates in 2022 looking for?
Oh, it all depends. I mean, obviously the fellows are always looking for their first job. That's always a move. But what I'm seeing now is that there's not a lot of radiologists that are mobile. As little as 2 or 3 years ago, almost all of my candidates were transplanted, going to move. They went on site, interviewed, did the family, make sure the spouse was comfortable with the area and liked it, and checked out the schools, and just the way it's always been. But right now, with the rapid evolution of teleradiology and COVID, which literally proved proof of concept of how teleradiology works, because such a large percentage of the radiologists out there just work from home. And I think it just kind of proved to everybody that it could be done. That has evolved to the point where most radiologists looking to make a change are not looking to move, but are looking for a remote position. And we could talk about that for a long time, because that's evolving as we speak, how that works and how that dynamic.
But your groups can't support that. Is that accurate?
Some of them do, yeah. We're working on models in which they can't support that. But it's a philosophy thing that has to happen. At first it was a tough nut that most private practices, so how do we hire a dedicated teleradiologist to be there, and how do we pay them? How do we schedule them? How do we do all this? Do they get full benefits? Do they get voting? Do they get partnership? It's really tough to do. And I think because now there are very few candidates experienced doctors, making moves. Most private practices right now are struggling with this. So you have seen in the last 6 months, the number of ads gone up for remote radiologists significantly, because I think the groups are just, we haven't got anybody to interview in the last 5 months on site. So, and we're desperate.
So what are the hospitals going to do? Because at some point, some of these groups, the older docs retire or move or whatever, and you got to get them in the hospital. No,
you do. And that's the other thing, there's got to be a differential or a delta between the on-site radiologist and the remote radiologist.
Well, and the other thing is the remote radiologist might be more productive.
Well, we expect them to be more productive.
Absolutely. And then they could be out earning the doctors on site.
Well, and that's where the delta comes into play. So most of our teleradiologists that we're hiring for our groups are employed by the practice. They get full benefits, and we have an expectation of productivity. They don't get paid by the RVU. It's not a productivity-based model. We call our teleradiologists list decompressors. These are the people that are going to be the force multiplier in the group, so that the on-site radiologist can do all the crap that needs to be done, and go to all the meetings and deal with all the on-site stuff, and drive, in the blizzard in the morning to go in. So, but the remote radiologists who may be working in Florida or Arizona or somewhere, their job is to crush the list as hard as they can, so that the on-site radiologist can go home at 5 o'clock and do what they need to do. And so that philosophy and that model is that the remote radiologists for the ability to live wherever they want and never leave their house if they don't want to, they're going to make less than an on-site private practice doctor, but they're not going to be underpaid, or, all of our groups are paying higher than the going teleradiology rate. And if you look at the corporates or VRAD or any of the, the other teleradiology
what are
companies.
what do you see as like the kind of going rate for teleradiology and the delta between on-site?
The delta is somewhere around 20% difference,
Yeah.
in what, I mean, if you're an employee, you're going to have some, enough security as an employee. You're going to have a good contract, right?
Yep.
And you're going to get paid. Some of them are just straight salaries with, reasonable expectations for production. Some of them have bonuses that, production bonuses, because if we're going to go ahead and hire somebody that's going to work 200 shifts a year and do, we want them to do 65 RVUs a shift, and then, that works out, if $30 an RVU, whatever it is, you're looking at a good base pay for somebody working from home, and if there's a bonus over that 15,000 a year, but if we get somebody that, is super easy doing 80 a shift, we're going to want to incentivize that person to keep doing that.
Sure.
Because it's another quarter of an FTE. Are
the fellows, so you talked about the experienced practitioners, but are the fellows looking for teleradiology, or are the fellows looking for,
just
graduated from fellowship, maybe I'm not where I want to be physically, like I did my fellowship on the East Coast, I want to come back to the Midwest, or
it's kind of a problem for me. I've been discouraging fellows from taking telerad jobs right out, because if you don't have that experience in the hospital, they did the residency and fellowship, so they've been in the hospital, but they've not had that dynamic of the other partners and, being a responsible, accountable radiologist, as opposed to in training. I think the fellows that do jump out into teleradiology are doing themselves a disservice long term. I think that if they get to the point where, they kind of lock themselves into being teleradiologists if they don't have that experience. So,
it's funny. I'm my full-time job is I'm CEO of Modality. We have about 30 employees, and different field, but same thing. And, I'm also discouraging our people that are coming right out of college or, early in their careers to go remote right away, because there's so much that you learn.
You're going to end up
about
being a
working.
whatever interpersonal skills you had are going to deteriorate.
Yeah, totally. I think the big thing that's lost is those interpersonal relationships,
right,
outside of radiology, right, where you're serving the referring physicians, you're serving the other people in the hospital or in the clinic or whatever it might be, and really learning what that takes.
Well, and there's another side to it too, and that's the productivity side. Every radiologist out there remembers their first year in private practice. It was not easy. The adjustment is hard. And the really good groups out there understand that, and they mentor their new fellows, and they don't have unrealistic expectations for that first year. Now imagine that person not even being there and being able to be mentored or anything. So I don't think that's a good.
So okay, so you're talking to fellows and you're saying, okay, don't do teleradiology. You give them your old man on the couch spiel, and let's say you get through to them. That's great. What else are the fellows looking for?
They're really looking for security. That's the biggest thing right now. I think that there's enough insecurity or uncertainty out there in radiology that it's funny about I normally hire 5 to 8 fellows a year for the last 20 years. For our group. So I'm constantly talking to all the fellows coming out of training, and you're right, that the fatherly on the couch thing, that's what I kind of picture my role being, as the old man who's been around the block and can give that kind of advice. And like I said, I always guide them to, through the process of, okay, what motivates, what's your biggest thing right now? Is it geography? Is it money? Is it work style, life balance? Is it vacation? Is it, when do you see, are you one of those guys that are looking for or gals that are looking for a really good, stable, long-term practice, or are you looking to make as much as you can and retire at 50? I want to get in their heads and figure it out, because I want that first job to be better. In the past, I used to call it 2 and out. They would take their first job and then they make a mistake, and 2 years later they're gone. I have hired more people, more radiologists that are in the second or third year of their first private practice than I have fellows, because
That's
they
interesting.
inevitably,
Yeah.
make mistakes or whatever.
It's so interesting. Same story. I went to Harvard Business School. That's where I got my MBA. It's a 2-year program. Most people that have gone into Harvard Business School, they've done 4 to 6 years of work experience at somewhere else, maybe banking, consulting, tech, whatever it might be. And then they want a career change. They go to business school, and then it helps them get a new job. 50% of people are in a new job after 2 years. Same exact story in a different industry, and about people the same age, in their late 20s, early 30s, their first big girl job, where they've got some real responsibility, and everyone chooses poorly. It's so interesting.
Yeah, it's human nature, I guess. And again, a lot of it comes down to how good of salespeople the hiring people are. I mean, let's face it, anytime you get a group of doctors together, there's going to be some kind of dysfunction somewhere. There's always going to be some greed. There's always going to be some manipulation. This is just human nature, right? So, but some groups are really good at hiding it. So you feel all warm and fuzzy. This is great. Wow, these guys are making killer money and they're doing whatever, and I can't wait. And they get on board, and then the skeletons start coming out of the closet, and they realize that they're working the extra weekends and the extra call and all this. As an associate, so it all comes down to the philosophy of the group and how the group works. So, and there are a lot of groups out there that don't do well, and they're not honest. And, so the radiologist comes and they work their butt off for 2 years, and they say, I'm not going to do this anymore. And then they're back out looking. And so when they do come back out, then they're super paranoid. I know I have one of my 2 and out candidates, because they got their list of questions in front of them, that are, this, that, tell me about this and all this. They got to get all those questions answered before they even want to consider interviewing. And I get that, and I'm prepared for that. But that's why I think recruiters, for the most part, don't do well in radiology. Outside fee recruiters don't do well in radiology, because of how complex that is. The modalities and the shifts, and all of the different stuff, the tech, the packs. It's hard. Unless you are really into radiology, you're not going to know those questions, and you can't answer those off of a bullet list.
Yeah.
So the radiologists tend to talk to, a recruiter gets a hold of one of those radiologists, and the radiologist dismisses them right off the bat because they don't know what they're talking about. But there are some really good radiology recruiters out there like me, who've been doing it a long time, and they're in demand, and they do well because they know that.
So what are some of the other factors that either fellows or people kind of looking, 2 years out of fellowship are looking for? Compensation's a big one. Maybe
lifestyle has been a huge thing.
Has that changed?
It has. Oh, it has. I mean, the change from when I started 20 years ago to now has been huge. I mean, back then it was, they were all still, the boomers that, have a completely different, attitude, and they were, work hard, play hard, give the practice your all, make as much as you can, maximize the retirement benefits. And, that's just the attitude, the way it was. They expected to come out and work hard and worked often. And that's just the way it was. But now, we're seeing that, across the board, the millennials and the Gen Zs and all the people, it's just, the world is changing. And I think, technology has a lot to do with that, and communications and everything, but they're not so focused anymore on making the killer buck. Now, it's still there. They, when it comes time to negotiate pay, and they're still making decisions based on, which group will pay them more and so forth. That's just human nature too. But there are other factors. It's not just the money or just the location. In years past, I mean, it was very easy for a radiology fellow to come out and say, hey, listen, I can go live in the suburbs of this big city and make X, or I can go move to this smaller town in the middle of the country, which is rather isolated, and make Z, which is 30% more than X. So it's just a simple factor that, talk to the spouse and say, hey, can we deal with this little town for 8-10 years,
Sure.
to build up our nest egg? Or if you want to be a suburbanite, then we're going to make less. That's just the way
Sure.
the world works. But now there's more to that. There's, there's time off, there's call schedule frequency, there's, the ability to work at home, have a workstation.
Are radiologists working less today than they were 20 years ago?
No, I think they're working more. And I think they're working.
That's so weird to me. Those two things sound really incomplete.
They're completely
trouble
opposite.
squaring this because you're like, hey, these lazy millennials, all they want is work-life balance, and they want to work from home, and they never want to work nights or weekends. But then you also say they work more than their predecessors.
Because you know what? Believe it or not, it's not that they can't work that hard, because they can. It's just they don't want to, and when they have to, they bitch loud.
So they're just whiny. They
are fully capable and to do it. And I know some have recruited some young radiologists that are in our groups that I would, they are absolutely amazing at what they do and all that. And it's funny, and I talk to them, and then they're like, yeah, God, this call's killing me, or oh my God, I'm on again next weekend, and it's just absolute murder, but they're not looking to leave. They know it's part of the deal, and they're getting compensated amazingly for it. But what motivates them, I think, most is if what they want is security through transparency, honesty, democracy. They really want to join groups that, and that's one thing we're really good at, is just the transparency thing, because if you have a third party management team, we work for all the doctors in the group, not just, we work for the corporation or the practice, not these three guys who happen to be the senior guys or whatever it is. So that transparency is great. So, I mean, the interview experience with me and our groups is very open, and you get information download. I've talked to some of the candidates that I've taken on interview, and I'm driving around and I'm saying, I've been on 3 other interviews so far, and I don't think I've got just a tenth of this stuff that you filled my brain with. You got any questions? Nope. So some groups, do it better than others, but I think that transparency and that overload of information, and the fact that we are wide open about the good, the bad, and the ugly, here's what it is. They can have a comfort level that they know what they're getting into. Whereas, a lot of the radiologists I've worked with over the years said, I went in thinking I knew what I was getting, and I had no idea what I was getting.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm leaving.
How is demand changing for specialization? What are you seeing there?
I think it's
everybody
easy.
in the country's specialized now. Are people able to just come in and read, just neuro or just MSK? What's that looking like?
No, I think the industry went overboard on the whole subspecialization thing. 10 years ago when it started, radiologists have always done fellowships, because radiology is the one specialty where there is so much to know. I mean, radiologists are at a level, so much higher than other doctors, that this is what I do. I'm a cardiologist. I do the heart. This is what I do. You got guys that do, that I'm an EP guy, or, interventional guy, whatever it is. But radiologist, to be a radiologist, you have to literally be an expert in every single body part there is, and every single modality to examine that body part. So, so subspecialization was a natural, in the sense that, hey, listen, not one guy can know everything there is to know about MSK and neuro and body, at the same time. So the fellowship thing is a great idea, in fully understanding that a radiology group is a group. And so if you have 10 radiologists in your group, and 2 of them are neuro guys, and 2 of them are MSK guys, and 3 of them are body guys, and that's the whole concept, to be able to do that. But to be completely subspecialized is still in the realm of academics and mega groups that are big enough and have such a wide footprint that they can afford to have somebody do 100% of their subspecialty. So most private practices still, and I consider this, 50, 60, 70, 80, even 100 radiologists or less, they're still going to be somewhat diluted in their subspecialty. Most of our groups, it's 50-50. If you're a neuro person, you come out, we're going to try to give you as much neuro as you can, but it's going to probably be 50-50. But you still have to be able to work your weekend or your afternoon shift and hold your own.
Well, shameless plug. That's what we're seeing too, and where we believe our training tools can really help groups. The number one reason people use the platform that we built is to learn a new subspecialty for this very reason.
Right.
They train in one area and then they get into the real world and they go, oh shoot.
Yeah,
I
deal with that all the time. I get, a candidate that says, hey, and my answer is, tell me what you can do, what you like to do, but tell me what you can't do. I need to know what you can't do. And if it's, if the group has, it's a small group, and, just the way it works is, if you're on call, you're on a weekend, you got to do a nephrostomy, you got to figure out how to learn how to do nephrostomies. And if you absolutely don't want to do nephrostomies, then you don't want to interview with this group, because this is what it is. And I'm just using that as an example, but there are some groups where you have to do absolutely everything. And so a lot of times though, the groups will take into consideration that, and then they'll mentor them and they'll oversee them and get them up to speed. But what you're offering is the ability, oh my God, I'm joining a new practice and I got to do this. If I can go do this online training and get all this stuff and do it, hey, that's awesome.
All right. Well, this has been a super fun conversation. I can't wait to do it again soon. Maybe we'll meet up live here as we head into RSNA. Last question for you, crystal ball. Since you've been through this rodeo once before, how does it correct? Where do we see the market start to turn into a more normal balance?
Daniel, I ask myself that every night before I go to bed. I'm trying to pull out the crystal ball and see what's going to happen. And at this time, I just don't know. The last time around, we had the whole DICOM revolution, which doubled the efficiency of the radiologist over film. And that's what saved us last time. This time, everybody's thinking that it's, AI. And at first I was like, AI is just not ready to do that. But I've been hearing, man, there's some stuff coming on with AI that is pretty amazing. I've been talking to a couple of guys, people that have, products out there, and I'm not going to plug anybody at this point in time, but the reality is as a force multiplier and as an efficiency gainer, the AI can play a role. And I think that, anything significant, if it's like 2 to 4%, whatever it is, efficiency gain, that just varies that much on a day, depending on how you feel for any radiologist, right? But when you're talking about 20+%, now you're talking about for every 5 radiologists, it's in 1 FTE. That can be a real thing. So I think that's the RSNA this year is going to be very interesting. And I do have a couple friends, colleagues that are involved in the AI thing, and I find it just fascinating. But I've changed my tune, and I do think that AI will be a force that will help us in a reasonable amount of time. It's never going to take over the job of a radiologist. I mean, that's just foolishness. That's crazy. But it will be a powerful tool to increase the efficiency of radiologists, and that's what we need at this point in time, because we're all of a sudden not going to start minting new radiologists any more than we have been. The residency and the fellowships are all fixed. And we still have this huge bolus of radiologists that are out there that are amazingly productive, far beyond the retirement age.
Yep.
Our groups have them. I mean, I know a lot of these guys that are, in their late 60s, early 70s, and they are amazingly accurate and amazingly productive. And they're only working as long as they're having fun. These guys don't need the money anymore. Some of them do, but most of them don't. And they love radiology, and they love their practice and their partners. So they're hanging on while we're recruiting. But eventually that time is going to come. So hopefully through a combination of tech and perseverance and most importantly, private practices being flexible and trying to find models and ways to integrate my saying right now is that every radiologist has value. Every radiologist, that if you have one eye and you can speak English, you have value as a radiologist, right? So, but you have to find out what that value is and how to make it work. It's got to work for both sides. So, hiring, somebody that's unproductive at full partner pay is not good for the group. So the groups need to be flexible. They need to look at each candidate and say, what does this candidate bring to us? And what are we willing to pay? And what are we willing to do to make that deal work? And, and if either side is desperate, it's not going to work. So that flexibility, I think, is what's going to make it come through in the end. So, but you and I can talk about 15 other different subjects as we move forward. So feel free to do another one.
Would love that. Dan, thank you so much. Really enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, my pleasure. And like I said, let's do another one. We can talk about a lot of different things.
Would love that. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Radiology Report podcast. Be sure to visit us at the radiologyreportpodcast.com or subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts to join us for our next episode. We are always looking for great guests. If you have someone you'd like to hear on the show, please get in touch with us online.